Welcome back to the Drawing Database, Professor Marc Leone. Today we're going to look at and spend 15 minutes with the work and drawings of Sandro Botticelli, the famous Botticelli. He's a Florentine Italian painter in the early to middle Renaissance, mostly early, born in 1445 and died in 1510. And today we're going to look at many or enough of his preparatory drawings here. So in front of us here we have our first preparatory drawing of a young man, young suitor, probably of the court or the aristocracy, and really wonderful descriptive contour line drawing with some tone here on a tone paper, and then he comes in with some white chalk and highlights the light folds here of the cloth as we move in and undulate in and out of the particular cloth here. So what we see now, even in the early Renaissance, we see a naturalism, a studied, prepared artist who is fully involved with most of the time the natural look of an order of objects and human beings, and the painting of reality in a much more representational or true natural observational perspective, and using all of the tools of that perspective. So really lovely beginning academic, if you will, study in the early Renaissance. Here we see a design study for a semicircle rotunda, probably either a fresco or a painting to fit into a unusual or irregular shape here and then in through here as it turns and across, and we have three figures, three floating, more angelic type figures in full Botticelli flow. So if we think of the image of Venus, this fits right into his extravagant use of movement, of curves and flow within fabric and cloth in the robes of these figures. Let's go in a little bit deeper here if we can, and we can see a little bit more of the detail of this wonderful executed drawing here, probably in ink and wash, looks like to me. And we get a great degree of many things, of accurate anatomy, use of scale and proportion, as well as unusual viewpoint. We're slightly looking below the figures up to them, just slightly as they're floating, and we get some really wonderful foreshortening in the leg, natural looking, accurate looking feet, and use of character in the quality of the facial expressions to bring out a certain character. It looks like they're also singing, perhaps this figure singing hymn. So we get a really wonderful overview of the magic and the quality of Botticelli's genius and the design of these figures. This drawing favors comparatively to his painting of Venus arriving at the shore, which is a mythological painting. But we get to see the wonderful drawing, meticulous drawing technique, fine rendering technique of Botticelli. Possibly in silver point, we see a very fine descriptive line in this lay-in of this kind of cornucopia or horn that this young cherub is perhaps using or going to blow out of here. And so we see a nice descriptive contour, quick sort of sketch lay-in, and then we see the final rendering in the forms of this beautiful gestured woman. Look how long and graceful and elegant she is. So there's really an understanding of linear length, almost too long. Look how long this hand is. So that's stylized and not necessarily completely from life, but possibly influenced by life and then stylized to make extra long, thin, kind of fashionable looking, elegant figure. And then we have the graceful use of the drawing of the drapery of the fabric, and it's lit from the left through here, and she's lit from the left. So the use of an understanding of the most simplified kinds of forms, egg form, a cylinder here, egg forms there and egg form here for the abdomen, cylinders for the leg, and so on, as we see a beautiful, graceful example of a well-lit figure, core shadowing, and then the elegance of constructing a form that's longer and more elegant and less from a natural pose, but idealized, and the proportions are changed by Botticelli. The graceful toes in through here, the structure of the feet. It is an illustration of an artist who has mastered the new concepts of humanism in the Renaissance. Here we see another perhaps chalk drawing or ink drawing that's highlighted in light in chalk, and we see probably what is the image of Christ, or perhaps a saint or an apostle, perhaps David even, or Saint John. We see the spirit of the Renaissance here with a natural-looking pose, offset hip placement into the pose, a little bit of weight distribution that we wouldn't see in the early Renaissance or the late Gothic period from Giotto or the Limburg brothers, and certainly not in ancient Rome or also in Egypt. So we see a very natural, more realistic understanding of all of the elements of drawing. Beautiful, graceful. Let's go in deeper to the light on the chest and the drapery here to get a little closer view of what he's doing, also with bark making and hatch marks. Notice these beautiful little graceful undercut hatch marks. This also favors sculptors as well. It sort of signifies a kind of contouring and also a cross contouring, and then the beautiful curves we get of perhaps wool or lamb's clothing in the stylization of the undergarment as well. So beautifully lit from the top left, as we see in the face, and beautifully shadowed. Notice how simple the shadows really are. They're really just one tone with more of a crevasse for the folding and some underneath hatching, and the beautiful control of edges. Notice the in and out quality of the bicep here, then the straight line, and then the bulge of the forearm extensor and flexor muscles here, and then a real strong dip to signify a very well developed upper arm, and then down to the blocky wrist and over to obviously the thumb there. So beautiful control of the elements of drawing by Botticelli. Here we have another example by Botticelli, and the same idea of a graceful kind of figure. You could probably argue that this figure is not quite as elegant or as flowing and as commanding as the earlier image that we saw, but it still has the same prototypical Botticelli long neck, long features, long torso. Here's the lima bean abdomen area, very long. A more thicker thigh there, and then down to the feet. This might have been another preliminary study, and perhaps he wanted to elongate the figure later on. We do see some use of gesturing, this very much quicker pose, but we also see, if you take a look up here in the head, a decision-making process of where he wants to put the head. It's not a double figure, rather it's a study in drawing. And remember, these drawings were preparatory. They weren't meant to be shown on their own. It wasn't until really the 19th and 20th century that Renaissance master drawings were sought after as an art and a collectible in and of themselves. So we understand that Botticelli is trying to decide where he wants the better head position, and it's kind of hard to tell which one he chose. I would argue that he chose the far left one here. But again, we see the graceful linear quality that he has in drawing in chalk, the wonderful 3D quality. She's top lit naturally with some heightened chalk there, and then gracefully moves over to the right and turns as we get this beautiful robe and gown, and then the control of anatomy, and stylized and also elongated still with Botticelli. And notice the stylized position in posing of the hands and fingers. That was something that was very much on the minds of Renaissance artists, this kind of graceful use and gesture of the index fingers and the opposite fingers to give movement to not only the major parts of the body, but also certainly the expressive parts like the hands. A graceful, wonderful gesture here in Botticelli. We see through the cloth the actual gesture of the figure in the model, in through here, down through the leg, over to out into the feet. And the wonderful, graceful example of the execution of cloth and folds. So if you're interested in clothing in cloth and folds with the model, it might be a good idea to do some master studies with Botticelli, from Botticelli. So you get to see what he sees and what he's designed within the oeuvre of his work. We see the figure lit from the left top here, so it's lit with heightened with chalk. This is probably an ink drawing, heightened in chalk and washed with some wash tones in in ink, and then tightened with a line as well. We see also Botticelli's use of simple darks and these wonderful little long U shapes or hooks, if you will, to signify cloth and folds. That was probably something of his own invention. Long sort of undercut valleys and rivers where we go over and then underneath, right, and then back over the top to signify folds and rolls and pitches. So I have a video on that, the basic section, on drapery, and that holds well with these ideas that Botticelli brings to the table. And notice how he puts this figure mostly in shadow. So there's tone, value tone over the edge or all over the facial structure of this figure. And lastly, we see an image of what can be the Virgin Mary with Joseph and the child of perhaps Jesus here after his birth, and maybe a playful moment or a moment of reverence as she is in kind of mournful prayer or deep prayer. Joseph might be internally, and of course the baby Jesus looking up for inspiration to the heavens, to the celestial Father in Christian theology. And again, we see classic Botticelli with his wonderful folding and movement. Everything he does gets us to move around the figure, the model, up through the gesture. And notice the undulation of the folds, but they're not overtly calling attention to themselves, because the overall pose of the gesture of the three figures together is obviously the most important part of the communication here. So this is a study perhaps in a shaped canvas or fresco here, perhaps not, or just the paper was cut. We don't know for sure. Our art historians that have studied these images deeper could tell you that. Here we're just analyzing the use of tone or all the drawing elements. Again, lit above, generally from the top left, a drawing in ink, primarily heightened, meaning he's heightened the lighter side in a white chalk, and has used some cross-contouring lines we see as we get a little bit closer to the drawing to stylize that. Let's take a look also at the image of the child here, and let's go in a little deeper to get some rendering on the nude quality, and this is what I call the sausage-like quality that we see in Renaissance artists when they render babies. We get this wonderful pinching, so we get these large fat forms, and then we get the pinching. We get a bony part with the patella, and then we get these wonderful curvy linear forms, and then a pinching down to a joint, and then we get the arches again. So we notice the very round, sausagey kinds of forms, and then they're pinched together, squeezed together. Here again, kind of a bean form, boom, out, and then squeeze at the joint tightly with a darker kind of line to get that real packed in sort of almost, or again, like the making of a sausage or a bratwurst type of form. So there we go with Botticelli, the wonderful Sandro Botticelli, Florentine early Renaissance painter, and his look at drawing.